now starting with our last session. We will now really look at our third objective, which is to link sexual harassment measures and structural / institutional change. I mean, we have seen, and we know that inequalities persist in workplace because gender inequalities are really embedded in our organization. And so it is important when you work on sexual harassment or harassment based on gender and sex to look at really the systemic norms and structures that permits and perpetuate the gender nature of the workplace. So that's really what we want to discuss with you. One aspect I would like also to just briefly mention is that sometimes when you do some training on gender equality and in fact inequalities and certainly sexual harassment, you have people that deny that there are still gender inequalities because we are in gendered organization, and you have some I mean, it's a bit more subtle type of gender bias and discrimination. We cannot address this in the training, but obviously the Gender Equality Academy is addressing that as well. You know, what type of bias we can have in terms of norms and types of prejudice that a bit reconstructing, in fact, inequalities within a workplace. So about institutional change, what do we mean? Institutional change is a strategy aiming at removing the obstacles to gender equality that are inherent to the research system itself and adapting the practices of the organization. The main objectives of institutional change are to, according to the Commission, to enhance women's representation and retention in scientific careers and to promote the integration of the gender dimension in research and innovation. Really, the Commission is placing the fight against gender inequality and towards better gender equality within institutional change with these objectives of retention of women in and representation in scientific careers. You can see all the work done with the she figures, for example, but also promote the integration of the gender dimension within research and innovation. The tool used or that is recommended by the Commission to work on a structural institutional change is gender equality plan. And what is a gender equality plan? I mean, it includes a set of actions. So it can be, as we have mentioned that already, conducting audits of procedures and practice to identify gender bias, to identifying and implementing innovative strategies to correct any bias, setting targets and monitors progress via some indicators. So this is really important to see that a gender equality plan is not just some the adoption of a general objective towards fostering gender equality, or a broader strategy or plan, including a gender dimension, among others. It's really, for the Commission, it's really important that we stay focused on the gender equality dimension. The type of intervention that are mentioned as being part of a GEP, gender equality plans, are organization culture, reconciliation of work and private life, recruitment, selection and career progression, leadership and decision-making, sexual and gender-based harassment, but also integration of a gender perspective in research. So what I would now like you to do, but I don't know how I can launch I can launch the pool now. So what does it mean to address sexual harassment from an organizational perspective? You know, looking at really a bit forms of violence and how, in fact, your organization perpetuate gender inequalities and gender-based violence. Really, what we want to say here is that the focus, it should be on the organization and not on women. When we are talking about addressing sexual harassment from an organizational perspective, obviously this is the focus change from women to the organization. It should also go beyond a formal gender equality in institution. I mean, you have, as I said before, I mean, you have sometimes the remark that we have achieved gender equality, that there are more pressing issues now. But I mean, when you start to look at and so that, you know, if you are harassed, it's not about power. It's not this type of issues of gender inequalities. The gender inequality is not at the root of it, but we know that this is what research shows us, and practice is that really the roots of violence are this imbalance in power relation and gender inequalities. It requires a transformation of the organizational culture. I think you have mentioned that in your different exercise quite a lot. It really implies a systemic and integrated and long-term approaches on how you tackle violence. And that the issue is not to tackle only individual practices and look at this from an individual perspective, you know, like the bad boy. It is really about what is permitted in your organization. Important as well to see it in a holistic way, so that it's not just for employees, but it's staff, academic and support staff, and as well students that are facing sexual harassment. And there are some studies also looking at sexist culture in campus. Importantly, also looking at organizational perspective means that you have to look at intersectionality and see what are the determinant factors that will affect your experience of or higher chance to be sexually harassed, like age, human and social capital, academic status, migration status, and also sexual orientation, etc. So this is really also important to look so from a broad perspective, bearing in mind, however, that each institution has its unique a bit culture and factor and history. And so there is not, as I said before, there is not a kind of one way to solve the problems everywhere, but it's really needed to go deep into the institution and the way it is organized and functioning. Obviously, and that was also one aspect, it's not in the slide, but that's one aspect you mentioned also, you know, that it should be coming from should be a high commitment from the hierarchy on dealing the engagement to deal with any type of sexual harassment and harassment based on sex and gender. Is there any, I mean, this is a bit of a quick preview because we have also some training, obviously, that are more really on structural change, but I want that we discuss now in our subgroups the link between your the policy, or even if there is no policy, how you can make it much more structural. I think that's also an influence really institutionally the way the institution function. I think that was one clear message also from our work in groups. So is there any question on this?
how to approach the study of the culture of an institution and what aspects should we pay attention to? How do you study culture of an institution? So one thing that I would look at would be, what are the decision-making procedures? Who gets to speak? Who gets to be heard? Which to me then, you know, suggests something about norms of gender norms, so masculinity norms, femininity norms. That would be one part of the culture of an organization. But I'm not sure if you have something else specifically in mind.
Well, I think that in the culture, I don't know. I mean, I think you will study also the way, because you mentioned decision making, but there are the formal and the informal process. I think there is. I was thinking, for example, how you get the information in an organization. You know, what are the informal channels to be informed? I mean, that's an important way to put people aside if they are not part of some sport clubs or not going for a drink after work. I mean, there are things like that. I think it's also in the way, probably in the way you run your meetings, and you know. You organize your meetings. Do you have a very hierarchical way to conduct this, or do you have a very transparent process? And I think that's also linked to decision making. In fact, you know, that you make sure that everyone is informed about what will be discussed, what will be the process, then also what are the decisions. I see that as part of culture.
There's an interesting Swedish study on organizational culture and what they propose to do. I mean, to sort of really see the underlying norms and attitudes and beliefs and values that somehow build the culture or is the culture. What these researchers suggest to do is to study what's not seen. You know, in order to see what is the norm, you need to study what stands out. So you can't really study the norm because it's invisible. But when a behavior or an attitude or something is seen as unacceptable, then you can start understanding what the culture is, because it is what that isn't. So you have to study the opposite. So that could be, you know, one way to sort of see the culture is to study what stands out. So if sexual harassment cases do not stand out, if you don't see them, if management says that there are no cases of sexual harassment, then obviously sexual harassment is part of the organizational culture because we can't see it. So to study the things that stand out, then you can see what the norm and the cultural norm.
Yes, and you can see it in very different aspects. In fact, in all the areas we have mentioned as possible areas of intervention, we can have a look, you know, in the way you approach work-life balance, for example. It's also cultural norms, and I mean, yeah, there is potentially, you should look at all aspects identified.
There's also a comment saying that you can see it in the images of the website and the visibility of women in internal events, in PR material and brochures, which I think is a very good point. Just looking at university, Blue University, there used to be on all the web pages were these young youth, successful, white, middle-class looking kids. They were sort of the representative image of Örebro University. That's what Örebro University wanted us to be, which is obviously then saying that the rest of you don't bother.